Hi, my name's Josh. Welcome back to the Animated 100 list. You might want to know what is going on with the background. This is not the normal background here, and that background won't be returning anytime soon. So if you want to know a little bit more about that, you can check out the Patreon exclusive video or the YouTube member exclusive video. I'll have that up here sometime soon. But in the meantime, I want to talk about Bambi.
I'm Bambi.
Bambi is a film from 1942. It's an hour and 14 minutes long. I've got all my notes here, and you can see the comment here that basically said, hey, you should talk about Bambi. If you want me to talk about some kind of animated film to put onto the list, whether it's good or whether it's bad, leave a comment down below. I will definitely get to it, or hopefully I'll get to it sooner rather than later. For those unfamiliar with the Animated 100 list, I'm going through 5 different categories, ranking them 0 out of 10, and so possibly getting a 50-point score or a 0-point score or somewhere in between. Those 5 categories include animation, story, characters, sound and music, and the historical and social ramifications of that film. For those of you unfamiliar with Bambi, probably not many of you, but let me just tell you really quick that it's a story about a tiny deer as he grows up in the woods. He's also the prince of the forest. He befriends a skunk, befriends a rabbit. They go about their lives, they fall in love, and eventually he becomes the king of the forest, I think, after a giant forest fire. I'm not really sure. The thing about this story is that it's not really about the story, but more about the vibes of it, and one in particular moment that probably sticks out to most people. We'll get to that. Let's start with our first category here, which is animation. And this film looks fantastic. The opening shots in this film, panning through the woods, just really gives you an exact idea of what this film is going to be. It's basically like watching a painting come to life. I also love the way that these characters move and look. They've got an endearing quality about them, especially the younger versions of everybody involved, Flower, Thumper, and Bambi. They all just look so cute and adorable, and you want to befriend these characters. And kind of like we talked about with a Rugrats movie, the characters in the foreground don't necessarily match the background, giving a different tone and feel to what's going on in front of the background. And those watercolor backgrounds allow for the things in the foreground to pop out, which I absolutely love. I will say that there are some moments where the lips of these characters don't necessarily move as well as they should in terms of the matching and syncing to the sound, but it's very forgivable. I think that that's totally fine because these characters look so great. The backgrounds look so great. You just get kind of lost in this film. And in the later parts of the film, especially when there's fire and things like that, the silhouettes and the shadow work that's going on here it just continues to get better throughout the whole film until the film ends. Because of that, the animation on this film, out of 10, I gave an 8.5. As far as the story here, like I said, this story is more about vibes than it is about an actual story. Because of that, there's not a lot of depth here. It's an hour and 14 minutes where a majority of it feels like you're spent with a tiny deer and his friends kind of learning about life, only to be met with the death of Bambi's mom and kind of this hard transition from the death of Bambi's mom to springtime being a bit more joyful. It's not necessarily about what story there is there, but there are moments in this film that stand out more so than the story itself. When all of the different characters fall in love, for example, the death of Bambi's mom, the beginning sequence of this film where you see all of the characters come together as they meet Bambi for the first time, Bambi skating on the ice with Thumper, all of those segments stand on their own as kind of shorts, and it doesn't feel like there's a string of a story attaching everything together, or barely a string of a story attaching everything together as you get to meet the Prince of the Forest, as he kind of meets his detached father. You don't really ever get to know his father figure that well until Bambi he himself becomes this lasting figure in the forest. I don't necessarily feel as connected to these characters as I wish that I could if there was more of a story there. And because of that, I had to give this one a 4 out of 10. I like all the different segments. I like the characters. I just wish I was more attached to them. And I wish that I was more attached to any kind of story going on here. Talking about characters, like I said, I wish I got to know them a bit more. Specifically, I wish I got to know Thumper and Flower more than I do. We spend a lot of time with Bambi. Obviously, he's the titular character here, but even he doesn't feel like anything exciting. He's a child, and we get to see the world through Bambi's eyes as he learns to know what the forest is. But by the end of the film, I don't feel like I've overly connected or know who Bambi is in certain ways. I know that he's fallen in love, and I know that he now has this ownership over the forest, but I don't really know what he wants to do with that. I don't really know what he wants out of his life, besides just falling in love and being the prince of the forest. As far as all of the other characters outside of Flower and Thumper and Bambi, they all feel really underdeveloped and one-noted. Even Bambi's mom, who just feels like, well, she's just Bambi's mom and not much else to her. Like I said before, Bambi's father basically doesn't even feel like he exists out of a few lines and a couple of moments where he shows up mostly in silhouette. I love the idea that Bambi shows us the world from a child's point of view, but I don't love that it doesn't dig any deeper with these characters, so I had to give it a 6 out of 10. As far as sound and music, this is a great category, and as I was taking all of these notes, all I thought the whole time was, wow, everything about the sound and music here is awesome. The times when the music cuts out during the storm just adds a bit more to the frightening nature of the rain and the thunderstorm and the clouds all coming through, while also adding a sense of beauty as the camera pans through and you see all of these animals taking cover. During the death of Bambi's mom, those scenes, there's sounds of hunting dogs coming in, and it's genuinely frightening to hear, and it's juxtaposed against this music that comes in as springtime comes, and it feels a bit jarring, but also there's a sense of relief with that music once it comes in, and you no longer have this kind of dark, haunting feeling with the death of Bambi's mom. Overall, I would say that music produces a lot of the feelings that you're supposed to get throughout this film. Where there's a lack of story, the music kind of picks up and allows you to sit with these characters, which makes each scene that much better. I will say, though, the voices for both Flower and Thumper don't necessarily feel like they fit when they go from child to adult. I don't really buy that that child becomes that adult voice. You know what I'm saying? I feel like it's a little bit jarring to hear those characters speak once they become adults. Overall, I would say that the sound and music here is another huge highlight for the film, giving it an 8 out of 10. And then we move on to the last part of this film, the historical and social impact. And yeah, Bambi's mom dies. And regardless of if you've seen this film or not, you know that fact. I think that it becomes one of those pop culture moments that regardless of who you are, where you've been, where you've come from, you understand that bit of the story. And you may not know anything else about Bambi beyond the fact that Bambi's mom dies. And I don't know if that is a good cultural impact or a bad cultural impact, but it's there. The other thing that has to be talked about is that this is the first feature film from Disney that takes a stance on a social issue, and that's hunting. And I don't know if it was a huge social issue at the time. It certainly isn't one now. However, I do think that you befriend these characters, and then all of a sudden humans come in and ruin the experience of the forest for these characters, specifically for Bambi, because they kill his mom. But this also just goes to show, outside of hunting, what humans do to the natural world. I think that's an interesting thing to talk about, especially with this film. I wish that more people talked about it. So many people now say, oh, Disney's so woke, Disney has this political agenda. But this was the first time that Disney actually had a stance on a social issue in a feature film, and this was the 1940s. Nearly a century ago, Disney was doing this, and they would continue to do this all the way up till today. And really, it's kind of shaped a bit of that side of Disney, that social, historical look at Disney and how we see these films, not just as fun, friendly kid films, but as something to say. And I think that's maybe its biggest lasting impression, although we don't typically talk about that. That being said, I ended up giving the historical and social part of this film a 6 out of 10. If I've done all of the math right, then that means that this film scores a 32.5 out of 50, and it actually scores really high on our list. I mean, in terms of Disney films, being the only 2 Disney films on the list, yeah, it's definitely better than Chicken Little. And with that said, in the next 2 weeks, I'll be adding another film to the lineup, and that is The Pebble and the Penguin. I believe that if you go online right now, you can go to Tubi and watch Pebble and the Penguin for free, or you can watch it wherever you'd like. And I'll see you again in 2 weeks for another discussion around the animated 100 list as we slowly fill this thing out and, keep adding new movies, and hopefully, eventually, we'll never have to talk about Chicken Little again.